Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
No matter how you look at it, animal agriculture helps Nebraska's economy. The livestock industry provides increased tax revenues for schools and community services. Livestock enterprises also create jobs while contributing to existing businesses such as local banks and grocery stores. A thriving livestock industry helps maintain our current way of life, but also provides opportunities for the next generation of farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff helps to raise awareness of the importance of animal agriculture to Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Ron Plain describes rough profit levels for hog farmers. Kurtis Harms shows how an artificial grass company is using soybean oil in its lawn turf. Jay Jenkins explains why pasture owners and renters should have disaster clauses in their agreements, while Bruce Anderson looks at current pasture conditions, and Bob Klein updates us on Nebraska winter wheat after temperatures recently fell below freezing. The drought continues in Nebraska, but to the east, it's over with emphasis. Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, also known as the center of the Corn Belt, have been slammed with heavy rains. What was a blessing a month ago has now spilled riverbanks and caused flooding in a multi-state region. Traffic on the Mississippi River that was stalled months ago by low water levels is now hindered by the exact opposite. Portions of eastern Iowa, Illinois, and central Indiana have received more than 5 inches of rain from April 17th to the 24th. For the last month, those areas are more than 8 inches over their average precipitation. As for the corn labeling of center of the Corn Belt, 2013 spring planting is at a standstill and way behind where it was a year ago. Iowa and Illinois produce more corn and soybeans than any other states in the country. As of April 21st and the latest USDA crop progress report, Illinois had sown 1% of its corn crop, well behind its 5-year average of 24%. Iowa hadn't even planted enough to record a percentage. Spring planting here in Nebraska remains delayed as well, with no measurable amount in the ground as of the latest USDA state report. Ron Plain is our marketing analyst this week. As much as crop growers are probably itching to get this year's seed in the ground, one might argue livestock producers are rooting for ideal conditions more than anyone. A big corn crop could do wonders for feedlot and finishing profit margins. When we talked with Ron Wednesday afternoon, he said the break-even marks for hog producers were already high as markets seem to be held down.
Well, Jeff, we're not doing real good. Carcass prices for hogs are in the mid-70s now. Tad bit better than where we were a month ago, not as good as we were a year ago. Been disappointing so far, but we should start to see some price improvement as we move through May.
Does that surprise you? Did you think it would be better than this?
Yes, it did. We're not doing so well on the demand side, and then pork production's up a bit more than we thought. Gosh, given the drought last year and high feed costs, we were looking for a bit more of a cutback in the swine herd than we ended up getting. And
instead, what happened? Did people foresee maybe big corn acres this spring?
It sure looks like it. They just hung on to those hogs, and certainly we planted most acres last year since 1937, probably more this year, and so if we can get some decent weather, we should see a lot lower feed costs, and looks like hog producers hung on in anticipation of that.
Yeah, I'll ask you about that in a second, but let's get back to demand. Where do you point your finger as to why it hasn't taken off, and do you think it can here as we start to enter grilling season? Beef is going to be competitive as well as you look at the price there, and then low gas prices would certainly put some more dollars in the customers' pockets.
Sure, Jeff, you're absolutely right. One thing is we can cross our fingers and hope the weather gets better. It's been a cool, wet spring. That doesn't put a lot of people out in the backyard grilling. Hopefully we'll see some stronger domestic demand and better weather. Exports are real disappointing so far, Jeff. We're down about 14% in pork exports compared to a year ago, and we may not rebound a whole lot from that. World pork production is expected to be up almost 2% this year. And when your foreign customers have more pork domestically, it probably means they're going to buy a little bit less from us.
Any reason that those numbers are up?
Well, you know, you wouldn't have thought
that is?
You wouldn't have thought so, given the feed costs here and around the world, but long-term trend has been expanding meat production around the world. The economy of a lot of the developing countries is doing quite well, and they're following through with larger livestock herds.
What about the strength of the U.S. dollar? How is that impacting that trade balance?
Yeah, well, in recent months, the dollar's been getting stronger, and that's not good news if you're trying to export U.S. products. The stronger the U.S. dollar is, the more expensive U.S. products look, and so for pork, that's worrisome.
Sort of a macro question, but do you think the dollar continues to be strong?
Well, it kind of looks like it. The Bank of Japan is expanding their money supply quite fast. The European Euro's got struggles. So relative to other major currencies, we've got our problems too, but still looks like the dollar could continue to increase in value for the next several months.
All right, what are your concerns for the 2013 planting season? I know the last few times we've talked about maybe an expansion here in the U.S., but obviously that depends on large corn production. What are your concerns as we go into planting here?
Well, it's flipped dramatically, Jeff. Gosh, 6 weeks ago, and everybody was talking about drought, and now we've gotten quite a bit of moisture and rain, at least Missouri and Illinois, and so planting is late. It's cool. We need some drier, sunnier days and get the corn in the ground. Otherwise, you start to, as you get towards the tail end of the season, start losing corn acres to bean acres.
To that extent, does that play through into any sort of expansion? What are you seeing in sow numbers? Are there more intended farrowings?
Well, USDA's last quarterly survey predicted that spring and summer farrowings would be down a short 1%. Given the fact we usually run about 1% more pigs per litter, that'll give us about the same pig crop as a year ago. Now, one of the other things we're anticipating is heavier weights. Last summer was miserably hot. Pigs don't like that. If we can get a little more normal summer, then we should see heavier weights on these pigs, and that'll add to pork tonnage on the market.
Where do we stand right now for a break even, and where do you think it could go?
Well, on a carcass basis, mid-90s is what it takes to cover all the cost of production. We should see that decline if we can get good weather and lower feed costs. That could drop down and give us break-evens around 80 cents per pound of carcass by the end of the year, hopefully.
That 90 doesn't leave much meat on the bone there for the producer, does it?
No, right now we may struggle to have one profitable month this year.
Oof. All right, what do you look for overall prices here in the hog market as we go forward to the next month or two?
Well, if the weather behaves itself, get some stronger domestic demand, I'm hoping we can get some $90 carcass prices at least a few days this summer. The peak maybe July, possibly as late as August this year. Then seasonally we tend to decline, probably see hog prices back in the mid to lower 70s by early December.
Next week we'll look at corn and soybean markets with Roy Smith. As mentioned at the beginning of the show, spring planting is behind in Nebraska, but better weather looks to be ahead. Speaking on UNL Extension's Ag Almanac radio program, state climatologist Al Dutcher said a widespread portion of Nebraska saw twice the normal April precipitation, and a vast majority of the state recorded normal rain or snow. Al says the extended forecast looks fine on that same front, but there is a concern over expected temperatures.
But overall, if we look at the official forecast put by the Climate Prediction Center, they don't show a major precipitation trend during the month of May for our region, which I take as a good sign. At least they're not painting drier than normal conditions. The same token, they are increased in the above normal temperatures into the western 1/3 of the state, and that extends all the way down through the southwestern United States. So there's our major concern, that we've gotten some timely precipitation events, but if we start to revert back to a drier trend, then all of a sudden we start slipping farther and farther behind especially considering when you get into May and June, these are very important water months for us in terms of precipitation, where typically in the western part of the state we would expect to receive in those 2 months somewhere just over 6.5 inches of moisture, and as you get into eastern Nebraska, closer to 8.5 inches of moisture. So it's very important that what we've seen continues, because we just don't have any deep subsoil moisture profile built up, especially below 3 foot. We're essentially bone dry, and it's going to take numerous amounts of these events to get us feeling comfortable that we're going to have sufficient enough moisture to get us through the 2 or 3 week dry spell during the heat of the growing season.
Al will return towards the end of the show with his weekly weather outlook. Earlier this month, Kurtis and I attended the 2013 National Association of Broadcasters show in Las Vegas. More than 90,000 media and entertainment professionals attend this annual event from over 150 countries. The NAB show takes place at the Las Vegas Convention Center and features over 800,000 square feet of exhibit space. While Las Vegas may be known for slot machines and poker tables, we didn't have to venture far from the Strip to find a connection to agriculture. Market Journal's Kurtis Harms has more.
This may look like an ordinary lawn. However, this grass is more closely related to soybeans than actual turf grass. That's because this synthetic turf produced by Sinlawn features domestically produced soybean-based carpet backings. Sinlawn has been manufacturing synthetic turfs since the mid-1960s. These nylon grasses are typically used for residential lawns, theme parks, and putting greens. The company also installs turf at sports fields under the AstroTurf name, and there are currently more than 6,000 synthetic turf fields being used in the United States. In addition to its synthetic turfs, Sinlawn also manufactures and installs a line of carpets. Before 1999, the synthetic turf and carpets featured a petroleum-based backing, which was unstable in its supply and cost. Now, however, Sinlawn partnered with its sister company, Universal Textile Technologies Incorporated, to use soy oil instead of petroleum in all of its turf and carpet backings. The oil is stabilized by removing gums and waxes and is then converted into a polymer. The polymer is an important component of the carpet backings because it helps lock the turf into place. The United Soybean Board and the Soybean Checkoff helped develop the technology. By using soybeans in the synthetic turf production, Sinlawn says they are able to use a domestic product. The soy-based backing is just as effective as the petroleum version, and the turf is 100% recyclable, which appeals to green consumers. In addition, synthetic turf is easy on our natural resources. Much of the turf is made from recycled tires. Approximately 5 billion gallons of water have been saved over the last 5 years by using Sinlawn's synthetic grass opposed to irrigating a traditional lawn. A synthetic lawn also reduces the need for any chemical applications, such as pesticides and fertilizers. The public's interest in bio-based products continues to grow. The United Soybean Board recently conducted and then released the results of a public opinion survey on consumers' knowledge of bio-based products. The study indicated 63% of those surveyed were interested in bio-based products or learning more about them. The study also showed that consumers often look to the federal government to promote bio-based products and to educate consumers about them. Sinlawn's soy-based turf backings align with President Obama's directive to increase the government's purchase of products with greater bio-based content. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Kurtis Harms.
Thanks, Kurtis. Sinlawn says the popularity of synthetic lawns is growing in both residential and commercial settings. In case you're wondering if UNL's Memorial Stadium uses AstroTurf, it doesn't. It uses an artificial surface manufactured by Field Turf. The last 12 months haven't been kind to Nebraska pastures. Drought reduced grass output, adding to a short forage supply initiated by little 2011 rainfall in Texas. As we look to this year's grazing season, we asked Bruce Anderson to outline considerations for farmers and ranchers as grasses begin to green up.
I think we see that pastures are starting to green up finally with a little bit of warming and a little bit of sunshine and of course moisture that's generally been received throughout the area. But we've got to remember that there's still dry soils down pretty deep within there. We've had some improvement, but we need more moisture throughout the year where all is not safe for us yet. Well, we've been encouraging people all winter and spring long here that they need to wait for 10, 14 days later than usual before they turn the animals out. And our reasoning for that was that the plants were weakened as a result of last year's drought and overgrazing. that weakening hasn't changed any just because we've gotten some rain now. So we still would hold with those delayed turnouts in order to let the plants recover from last year's stress. Now, fortunately, we've got some moisture there, so hopefully they'll grow well to begin with and recover nicely so that when we do turn the animals out on the pasture, they'll be able to regrow rapidly and provide good feed for an extended period of time. We all have kind of a visualization of what the pasture looks like when we normally turn the animals out there. What I'd suggest is that when the pasture reaches that stage, wait another 10 to 14 days before turning them out, and with halfway's average spring temperatures thereafter, we should have some good recovery and the plants will be ready to handle some of that stress from grazing. If we turn the animals out too early, those weakened plants are definitely not going to regrow as rapidly as they normally do. That's going to end up with a reduced carrying capacity over the course of the year. And in a few cases, we may even result in some plant death losses as a result of the excess stress placed on those plants.
Bruce advises farmers and ranchers to use a conservative stocking rate this season, perhaps in the range of 80% of normal. He says good moisture has improved pasture conditions, but drought-weakened plants still need to recover from typical grazing. We also talked Tuesday to UNL Extension educator Jay Jenkins from Cherry County to discuss leasing options for pasture land. Jay says producers should think about implementing disaster clauses into their agreements, and he says there are two crucial aspects owners and renters should start with.
The two most important things are pretty obvious, but one is the lease rate. That's the one most everyone's concerned about. But also, stocking rate is extremely important. It's very important to have stocking rate included in your lease agreement. Balancing forage demanded by the livestock against the forage produced by the land is the most important part of grazing management. And too much grazing pressure leads to long-term decline of rangeland productivity and just overall damage to rangeland health. And so it's important that those two be matched.
And who decides that, Jay? I mean, is that the owner's decision? Is it the renter's decision? Do they decide together on when you're looking at the grazing or the stocking rate?
It usually depends on the skill and experience of the landowner. Mm-hmm. Often it would be the landowner who decides that. Sometimes it's a joint decision, especially if the landowners don't have that much direct history or contact with the land. If they're an absentee landowner, they often depend on the leasee for input and sometimes guidance in that. But it's ultimately the landowner's land, and so it's ultimately their decision.
One thing you're also talking about this year is a disaster clause. What is the disaster clause, and why would it be important to put it in the lease?
Well, because grazing pressure is so important to overall long-term rangeland health, there needs to be some mechanism for the landowner, really for their goals for rangeland health to be reached. And that usually is a clause, call it a disaster clause, drought clause. The grazing lease needs to include a way to adjust grazing pressure in the event that drought or fire or hail or some other natural disaster reduces rangeland forage production. And that needs to be specified. That clause should include who makes the decision and what that decision's based on. If it's going to be forage residual remaining in the pasture, which is really what it usually is based on, then that needs to be specified in the clause. And the clause should also say who's going to make the decision. That's usually the landowner, but not always, but it should be specified in writing.
If you're looking for additional resources on farm and ranch leasing, Jay recommends the website aglease101.org. You can find pasture and rental agreements as well as templates you can use to begin your plans. Paul Yassa says the major benefits of planting a cover crop seed mixture are feeding and protecting the soil. In the April Nebraska Farmer, the UNL Extension engineer says soil erosion control is an obvious benefit, but soil organisms must be fed year-round to have a healthy soil system. There are a large variety of cover crop options. In April's Nebraska Farmer, specialists suggest doing your homework on this emerging cropping practice. In its latest state reports, the USDA rated 43% of Nebraska's winter wheat crop as poor or very poor. Since we last looked at wheat condition, farmers have had both good and bad news. Much needed precipitation fell over a large portion of the state, but recent snowstorms also threatened the crop with below freezing temperatures. Earlier this week, we looked at Nebraska's winter wheat crop with Bob Klein from the West Central Research and Extension Center in North Platte, where abnormal weather this season may have, in some form, actually helped the crop.
The wheat this year is behind normal, and that was probably a good savior with the cold temperatures we had. You get a lot of damage in wheat with the temperatures we had if it's in the joint stage or later. Most of our wheat out here was just in the tillering stage, and the temperatures can really get cold when it's in the tillering stage.
How cold did it get?
Yeah, well, we've seen areas, way out in the panhandle that got to 0 and so forth. A lot of the other areas, was in the teens, and which can cause damage if it's in the joint stage. But the stage we were in, tillering, now we did have, and we want to mention, we had some cosmetic damage, in other words, the leaves, which has producers concerned, but it'll grow right out of that. That damage is nothing to be concerned with at this time.
You mentioned it was behind schedule. It was way ahead of schedule last year. How far behind, and in that, the saving grace, how far behind is it?
Yeah, in this area, we're probably looking a week to 10 days behind. Last year, in some cases, we were probably 10 days to 2 weeks ahead. So quite a difference in years between 2012 and 2013.
Now, we talked to Greg Kruger a few weeks ago, and since then there has been some precipitation that's been widespread across the state, both in snowfall and rainfall. How beneficial has it been for you? Have you caught any of that?
Yeah, some areas have caught a little bit, but nothing pronounced too much in the west central area. I did some sampling, like in the McCook area last week, and we did find the field that had 3.5 feet of subsoil moisture. Most of the fields in that area, though, were running maybe 20 inches to 2 feet. On average, we'll probably be close to 4 feet at this time on subsoil moisture in our fallow fields, and that's what we have mostly out here is fallow wheat. And so we're extremely short of moisture, and that could be the biggest limiting factor in our 2013 wheat yields.
That's the biggest concern going forward is moisture?
Yes, but in some cases, stands are also a problem. Depend where you're at. Like right in the North Platte area, that wheat that didn't germinate last fall, those stands are pretty spotty this spring.
Too early to tell on what the potential yield is as far as, if you have any options with that wheat. Are you best just to ride out the storm, so to speak?
Well, one of the things is winter wheat really provides a good foundation for other crops like planting corn or grain sorghum or sunflowers in 2014. So we always tell producers you're probably way ahead to leave that crop, take it to maturity, and then spray it out, spray the weeds out after harvest, of course, and then plant a crop next year. So winter wheat's a good base. If you tear it up, you're kind of starting over. And in many cases, we don't have great amounts of subsoil. So we're encouraging people to leave that wheat crop because it's such a good foundation for all the succeeding crops.
The one thing you hear if you talk to a lot of wheat people, they say wheat is tough. It has a number of lives to it. Do you feel like you've used a few of those this year?
Yeah, we're already into probably 4 or 5 or maybe even 6. And so we don't want to use too many of them because we got quite a bit of season to go yet.
After a rough start weather-wise, this week ended on a strong note for those looking to get into the fields for spring planting. Now with this forecast for the next few days, here's UNL Extension state climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. Of course, during the early part of the week, we did have another significant weather maker move across the state and dump some significant moisture across portions of eastern Nebraska. Lesser totals as you got out into central and southwestern Nebraska. And of course, we've seen some snow accumulations once again up in the northwestern portion of the state into the western portion of the Sandhills. Now, we've seen some impressive warming this last couple days, and that's expected to continue at least into the early part of next week before we see another funnel boundary moving its way in from the northern plains. So overall, we should see some good drying weather this weekend, and I would suspect that we will probably see a kick up in planting activity as we progress into the early part of next week. and then we'll have to wait to see how this precipitation with this system bears out. But by all likelihood, it does look like the worst of the precipitation will hit eastern Nebraska and miss most of western Nebraska. So let's get a look at the models and see what we can expect as we go through this next 7-day period. And as we go to the upper air model, what we'll show you here is that there is some energy over the Great Lakes, and we do have some ridging pattern. The very warm air has moved into our region. We're expecting a very nice day today. Pretty much everybody should be in the 70s. And as we go into tomorrow, we'll see that the frontal boundary tries to sag its way across the northern plains, and that might bring a little bit of cooler air into the northern part of the state, and we might see temperatures drop 4 or 5 degrees. But certainly across the southern part of the state, we'll be looking well into the upper 70s to possibly even some isolated 80-degree weather. Don't think we're going to see much in the way of any significant activity, but we may actually kick some off as we get into Monday. As we start to see this energy moving down toward the plains region, there may be during the evening hours of Monday some isolated thunderstorms, particularly in northeastern Nebraska and maybe even into east central Nebraska, but it's going to be very, very widespread. Now, as we get into Tuesday, we see that the energy starts moving its way down, and there is a possibility, depending on how quickly this front comes through, that we could see some isolated severe thunderstorm activity across eastern Nebraska, but fairly dry conditions across western Nebraska, and we'll start to see the cool air come into the northwestern part of the state during the late afternoon. Now, as we get into Wednesday, we're going to be looking at most of the energy directed over central and eastern Nebraska, and we are looking for a stratiform type precipitation event. And depending on which model you look at, anywhere from a half an inch to possibly even up to 1.5 inches if we do get a few claps of thunder across eastern Nebraska. And then this system is expected to rapidly move to the east and pull most of that cold air down, and then this low will cut off. So in eastern Nebraska, depending on where this overall cutoff low sits, may determine how quickly we warm up as we go through the week. But on Friday, what we are seeing is that low cuts off, and then it's going to meander around for a couple days. And if it backs up, we'll see cooler conditions. If it moves to the east, we'll see a rapid drying trend. So let's take a look at what we expect for temperatures. We're looking at some very nice conditions this weekend. Not that much in the way of any significant moisture until we get into Tuesday, where we have isolated thunderstorm activity that may be severe across eastern Nebraska, turning to a more stratiform type precipitation event on Wednesday. And then we see clearing and gradually warming temperatures on Thursday and Friday. The 8 to 14-day forecast indicates the cold air will sweep to the south. And in terms of precipitation, it looks like drier weather is on tap.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews with Ron Plain, Jay Jenkins, Bruce Anderson, Bob Klein, as well as our reporting from Sin Lawn in Las Vegas are available individually on the Market Journal website as part of the April 26th episode. You can also watch individual segments on the Market Journal mobile app, which is available on iTunes, and after a brief hiatus, is again available on the Google Play Store. Next week, Roy Smith will be our marketing analyst, and we'll look at the progress of winter wheat diseases in southern states and in Nebraska. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.